Get the perfection thing out of your head. A lot of people know, I want to be the perfect dad, this and that. I'm going to suggest you eliminate that perfection thought process. Let's think about intention. Have you ever caught yourself reacting to your kids in a way that you swore you never would? Well, today we're going to be talking about letting go of last year. We are in the new year, but it's letting go of last year, how to break the cycles you grew up with. And you are watching Dad Central, a parenting podcast to reduce stress and build confidence in fatherhood. Also, our show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. And Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. Also, we want you to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and wherever you're listening, subscribe. I know it's on Apple Podcasts. Drew will tell me where else, but wherever you're listening to it, subscribe there and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. All right, Drew, how you doing? What's going on?
I'm good, Ed. New year, everyone's excited. It's, the beginning of those resolutions. Everyone's like, yeah, it's going to be different this year. And of course, you see it every year. There's the drop off. And so I think this is a really great conversation to have because the truth is that, change doesn't happen overnight and a new year doesn't make all of a sudden everything new. There's actually a bunch of work that goes into it. And I think that's what we're going to just scratch the surface on today. And we want to know that, if your desire is to create change this year, we want to come alongside you on that journey. And we want you to recognize that, there are people in your corner and we're here for you. So hopefully these types of conversations will give you the kickstart that you might need or the insight that you might need. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Absolutely. And as Drew said, we're walking with you. And part of that walking with you is we'd like to answer your questions about fatherhood during our shows. So send us questions that we can answer live. See if you can stump us. you can send you can send the questions. I'm having fun. Send your questions to podcast@dadcentral.ca. And I think you guys or you folks out there will give us suggestions and questions and make us better too. So let's get right into it. Let's get into our conversation topic today. And let's start with the first area, healing father wounds. What are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, I think we need to preface this with that, we often as dads repeat the patterns that we've grown up with. Some of us have experienced silence, anger, emotional distance, control, unhealthiness. Some of us have also experienced, present, available parents, but I'm sure there are elements that maybe weren't exactly ideal or how we would want them. And so there's these patterns that show up in our lives. And sometimes those patterns can be inadvertent and you don't even realize it. And sometimes they surprise us. But we want dads to know that in terms of being able to move forward, it is important to recognize where is the wounding and what was the origin, we'll say, of some of these patterns that we begin to recognize in our lives that truthfully only sometimes come up once you become a parent. Because kids are like this magical gift that they literally help identify things that we had long hidden or buried and never actually knew were still there. So that's the opportunity. And so what happens, I would say, is that there are often wounds we experience in our own childhood. Many of them may have come from our own fathers. And we want you to recognize that that is, one, it's common. Two, it's painful, right? And we want you to know that, we're not here to dismiss or, over explain. We're here to acknowledge the truth that these wounds are there and they do have an impact on us, whether we want to recognize that or not. And it's only when we choose to take the time to go into these areas that we will begin to be able to enact that process of change that we want to see. Let's talk briefly about what fatherhood wounds can look like. So things like you are having or experiencing a lack of emotional connection. Maybe it's with your partner or with your children or both. Maybe you see yourself as the disciplinarian and you were disciplined in a harsh way, and now you're disciplining your children in a harsh way. Maybe you had an absent or inconsistent father, and what you're finding now is that there's a pattern of absence or inconsistency popping into your fatherhood. Or maybe you've got, this intense pressure that you're putting on yourself to show up as like a perfect dad, or to provide, in significant ways that are just you are heaping positive pressure on yourself. These are some ways that we'll see the father wound can show up in our own fatherhood. But those are some of my thoughts, Ed. What can you add to this?
Yeah, and thank you. It's a great foundation for us to go deeper in this for a few moments. There are unhealed wounds that can show up in fatherhood, and some of them can be overreacting, shutting down emotionally, fear of being close. But Drew and myself, we want to reframe this and look at it this way. Healing isn't weakness, it's leadership. I love that. Healing isn't weakness, it's leadership. And then for all our family out there, you don't heal for your dad. You're healing for your kids and yourself. I think those are two strong statements there. Healing isn't weakness, it's leadership. And you don't heal for your dad, you heal for your kids and yourself. So, what did you need from your dad that you didn't get? Think about that. Drew, anything else before we move further with that?
Yeah. That question that Ed posed, uh, it may take you down a path of you become angry. You may become resentful because like my dad didn't give me these things and I really wanted them. I want you to also recognize that's normal. That is part of the process to actually heal. You have to experience the pain, and if if that's what you're experiencing, um, you know I'd say that's positive because you're actually choosing to go deeper into it. And that's going to help you become better. It's going to help you begin this process of healing. I think of John Smith Baker, who was a guest on our podcast, almost 2 years ago now. And he wrote a book. It's called Man Enough to Forgive. And this is directly in line with this idea of healing that father wound. And forgiveness is one of the keys that unlocks your own healing. It may feel counterintuitive or sound counterintuitive if you're not familiar with or aligned with forgiveness as an important value. But the truth is that is one of the most powerful ways to heal the father wound is to find ways to forgive. And forgiveness is not, um, you know, wiping away the fact that damage has been done. It's making a choice that you're going to free yourself from the harmful effects of the feelings that you're still harboring. Uh, when the only person that's hurting is you. So, anyways, I just wanted to mention that because I think that's a great resource for dads in this process of healing the father wound. And as I said, we're just scratching the surface here, but hopefully with things that dads can take away and begin working on their own.
All right, let's move on to our next topic, understanding your triggers.
Yeah. So this is really about taking that pattern recognition even further. So a trigger is essentially a moment when your emotions spike faster than your mind can really control you. You say your logic, right? It's that instant reaction to something, right? Maybe your child is disrespectful and has a real bad attitude, and it's at the end of a long day. You've been dealing with disrespect at work. You've missed some deadlines and things are feeling like they're piling up, and you don't have enough mental bandwidth, and all of a sudden your kid's disrespectful, and you just snap at them. That's an example of a trigger, right? And other things could be defiance, right? Children, their authority, or they're challenging your authority, or some other aspect of their defiance, and that can trigger you. Often feeling ignored or unappreciated One that I think is important as well is often rejection. Rejection can often be a common parenting trigger as well. And so, the one thing that we want to talk about and why are we bringing this up is because triggers are often connected to some of our childhood experiences, often our painful childhood experiences. And we essentially, um, we have this memory, but our memory is not in our conscious mind. It's almost more in our body and in our emotions, right? And so when that trigger is pushed, essentially we react because it's almost, as I said, it's subconscious and in those emotions as opposed to in our conscious mind. And so one, just being aware that we all have triggers. Two, acknowledging that if a trigger happens, it's actually an opportunity for you to identify, well, what's deeper, what's going on there. And three, there's ways to shortchange, we'll say, that reactive cycle and learn to actually respond even when we're triggered. And the way you do that is something we've talked about before, which is our stop, drop, and breathe. And this is when you notice that you are starting to get agitated or irritated or frustrated or you're having these bigger feelings. You simply stop, what you're doing. And it's often usually in interactions with our children. We stop what we're doing, we drop our agenda or the thoughts, or we're like, we need the next step to happen, or we need this defiance to stop, or we need this behavior to shift. Drop that agenda of what you want to see happen and then begin breathing. Just taking a nice deep breath, and ideally 3 to 5 deep breaths, because that breathing is the only way to actually shortchange that automatic reaction and change our physiology from that hyperreactive one to be more conscious and using our actual brain and logic as opposed to the emotions. So, anyways, we just wanted to share some of those key pieces around this idea of triggers and how it works. We do have a separate resource called the 7-Step Guide to Stop Yelling, or 7 Step to Stop Yelling Guide. And that goes much deeper into triggers and gives you another framework. So we'll add that as another resource in the show notes.
Excellent. The only thing I'll add to Drew's great answer is I just say triggers aren't the problem. They're signals pointing to something unresolved. That's all I'll add to that. Let's go to creating new patterns.
Yeah. Ed, why don't you talk a little bit about this and then I can jump in where you need.
Yeah, I again, and we talk about this a lot about perfection. A lot of people know I want to be the perfect dad, this and that. I'm going to suggest you eliminate that perfection thought process. Let's think about intention. Let's think about intention first, right? Again, I always say you don't have to be perfect all the time. You have to be perfect at the right time. So, new patterns, responding instead of reacting. How about apologizing to your kids? Hmm. Then expressing your emotions openly and setting boundaries without fear or anger, you know? And look at small daily decisions because one different response creates a new legacy. So if you look at all that framework, get the perfection thing out of your head. Let's think of intention. Let's think about consistency. Let's think about key things like if you're not responding instead of reacting, are you apologizing enough to your kids? And are you expressing your emotions openly and you're setting boundaries without fear or anger? Drew, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think this is really important. The concept of creating new patterns, this idea of creating healthier or better habits. And really where I go back to is years ago when I created Connected Dads. There was this framework that just began to surface as I thought about trying to break my own cycles and change and create new patterns in my own life. And that's where I came up with my 4 A's coaching philosophy. And it's the 4 A's are awareness, which we've talked about in sort of our first 2 segments, um, alignment. And so alignment is really identifying the dad you want to be or the person you want to be, having understanding of your values, right? So you've got to get that clarity. Then it's activation. And activation, this is a conscious choice to begin thinking the right thoughts. And we've talked about this, I think, in our first episode of 2026, where it's sort of this idea of identity based habits. My identity, my thoughts should be on the identity of the dad I want to be, not on the identity of the dad that I maybe have been, or the mistakes that I've made, or the self critical voices that are actually the voices of others who have been negative in our lives, or maybe not spoken the positive things we want. So activation is that third A, and activation is thinking the right, conscious, positive thoughts about yourself as a father. And the fourth one is accountability. Accountability is outside of yourself, or establishing your own form of accountability. And often, another dad or a close friend, a coach, or a community where you can get that accountability for keeping the new thoughts and the new patterns ever present and moving forward. I feel like that's a powerful framework that I just want to share there, because I have seen that pattern in my life of awareness, then aligning my thoughts and my actions with what really I do want, then activating, continuing to think those thoughts, because when I make mistakes or I stumble, that self-critical voice has a tendency to jump in, and you need a way to counteract that. And then the accountability piece, knowing that there's an external, a person or group or process, has been instrumental for me to change those patterns and become the calm, connected dad that I am. And so, anyways, I think those are built off of one choice applied daily as consistently as possible moving forward. It's not a massive big thing, it's just one choice. So, dads, you can do this by just making the one small choice and trying to repeat it day after day after day. And if you miss a day or two or three, that's okay. Just get back at it. What's that one choice? And keep trying at it. Anyways, that's
Yeah.
my
Yeah,
addition,
that's
Ed.
yeah, no, that's I think it's a great way to round it out today. So let's review what we chatted about. We talked about healing father wounds. We also talked about understanding your triggers, and we close it out with creating new patterns. So some key takeaways. You can't change what shaped you, but you can choose what shapes your children. Also, healing father wounds is an act of courage and leadership. Triggers reveal opportunities for growth, not failure. Also, new patterns are built one intentional choice at a time, and breaking cycles creates freedom. So, really, really important. And we also want to encourage y'all to let go of last year. Doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. I'll say that again. Letting go of last year doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. And also, you can honor where you came from without repeating it. And then finally, your kids don't need a perfect dad, they need a present, growing one. Drew, what resource do we have? I think you may have mentioned it earlier, but you may have a different one up your sleeve.
Yeah, when it came to the triggers, I talked about the 7-step guide to calm, or to stop yelling. But our resource for this month is going to be our Fatherhood Fundamentals email course. It's a free 3-lesson fatherhood course. You can get it at dadcentral.ca. Right there at the top of that page, go ahead, put your email in, and you'll start the course. So that's our resource this month.
Excellent. So as we close up, as always, we want to answer your questions about father during our show. So please feel free to email us at podcast@dadcentral.ca. So as always, want to say thank you for giving the most important thing, your time, to either listen or watch us. As always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. Remember to give yourself grace, and we'll see you soon. Be well and keep the faith.